Rain hammered against the tin roof of the forward operating base, a constant percussion that blurred with the hiss of generators and the faint stench of diesel. The concrete floor had turned to slick patches of mud tracked in by boots. Inside, 12 Navy SEALs crowded around a folding table covered with laminated maps, markers, and half-drunk cups of coffee. Their chatter was low but restless, the kind of talk that tried to sound casual and failed. Lieutenant Mark Davis stood at the front, the glow from a single bulb catching the edges of his face as he traced the route through southern Mindanao with a gloved finger. Major Alan Pierce leaned back against the wall, arms folded, voice cutting through the sound of rain. "Backup won't be necessary," he said, his tone sharp with confidence. "It's a handful of locals with old rifles." A few of the men exchanged glances. One muttered something under his breath about officers who never left the wire. Pierce didn't notice, or didn't care. The briefing rolled on, tension thick enough to taste. Every word carried the weight of unspoken doubt. In the corner, away from the light, Staff Sergeant Emily Ward worked in silence. Her M2010 enhanced sniper rifle lay in clean, oiled pieces across a tan mat. She checked each component like a ritual bolt. Receiver, barrel, scope. The small click of her torque wrench cut cleanly through the murmurs in the room. She adjusted her optic rings with steady hands, spun the elevation turret, 1/4 turn, then back to 0. Her breath matched the rhythm of the rain. The weapon came together like something alive, every movement deliberate, practiced. And without sound beyond metal against cloth, a young SEAL glanced her way and made a quiet joke about the Army babysitting with binoculars. Another laughed. Emily didn't look up. She just tightened her sling and logged her adjustments in a grease pencil notebook. She'd learned long ago that quiet was its own form of authority. Around here, the SEAL's laughter faded back into the hum of rain, boots, and the rustle of gear being packed. When Davis finished the briefing, the room lingered in silence. The storm outside swelled as if waiting for someone to open the door. Pierce spoke again, calm and certain, his words pressing finality into the air. Emily slid her rifle into its case and locked the latches. The motion soft, but absolute. The metallic snap echoed once, then disappeared under the sound of rain. Every man in that room felt the edge of something coming. Though none would say it, the mission hadn't begun yet. But the storm already had. Rain still pressed down on the compound roof like a drum that refused to quiet. The air was thick with humidity and the low growl of generators running through the night. Staff Sergeant Emily Ward sat under a tin awning, her gear laid out in a neat pattern that only experience could create. She taped her range card to her sling, updated her ballistic data, and noted the barometric drop on her weather sheet. Variable wind, she thought. Bad for visibility and worse for smoke. Her M2010 enhanced sniper rifle rested across her knees. She opened the bolt, inspected the chamber, and checked the glass for fog. Every motion was slow and deliberate, a habit built not from fear, but from control. Her hands moved with the same patience her father had once taught her back in Montana. She could still smell the prairie dust, hear the sound of wind through fence posts, and her father's steady voice behind her shoulder, "Don't bully the trigger. Ask it." The memory came without warning, like breath fogging a scope lens. Back then she had learned not just how to shoot, but how to wait. Iraq later taught her to read walls for intent. Afghanistan taught her to read mountains for danger. The blast that took R. Jensen, her spotter, had taught her the silence that comes after both, now reassigned to observation only. She carried that silence like another piece of equipment. The engraving on her rifle reminded her of him, never miss twice. It wasn't bravado. It was a promise. Inside the operations tent, the rain turned to a steady hiss. Maps covered a long folding table, their corners curling under damp air. Captain Sarah Lou briefed the small team, her voice measured. Overwatch on Grid 7 Alpha, North Ridge. Small unique presence expected. Emily traced contour lines with a pencil, marking saddles, spurs, and dead ground. She asked what the plan was, if contact exceeded 20 hostiles. Before Lou could answer, Major Alan Pierce looked up from his tablet and smiled without humor. Planning for failure already? Sergeant Emily met his eyes and answered evenly. Planning for everyone to come home. The room went quiet long enough for the rain to fill the space again. Pierce said nothing more. When the briefing ended, Emily folded her map and slipped it into her notebook. Her rifle sat ready beside her, dry and clean. Outside, the rain softened for a moment, as if even the storm was listening. She packed her gear and stood, her face calm, her pulse steady. The night smelled like metal and wet earth. The waiting had already begun. Dawn crept over the jungle like a ghost. Gray light sliding through the mist and the thick canopy. The rain had eased to a drizzle, but the ground was still a swamp of mud and roots. Lieutenant Mark Davis moved first, his silhouette low and deliberate, hand signals flashing quick and silent. The SEAL team followed in formation, boots syncing with a rhythm that blended into the hum of insects and distant thunder. Every step carried the sound of wet earth and the metallic click of gear shifting under packs. The air was thick enough to taste, and every breath smelled like moss and gun oil. High above them, Staff Sergeant Emily Ward crawled into position on the north ridge. She moved like part of the terrain, her ghillie veil dark with rainwater and leaves. Her overwatch point overlooked the valley below, a perfect line of sight through a narrow break in the trees. She unfolded the tripod, locked her rifle into place, and checked alignment through her M2010 scope. The world shrank to the circle of glass in front of her. Her Kestrel 5000 og 700 blinked data temperature, pressure, wind direction. She noted the slight crosswind and adjusted 0.5 mil to compensate. Every motion was quiet, every detail exact. She pressed the transmitter on her AN divided by PRC 117G radio. Falcon 9 in position. North Ridge. Visibility confirmed. Static hissed back. Then Davis's calm voice acknowledged. Through her thermal scope, shapes began to shimmer within the fog. 3 heat signatures. Then 7. Then 12. She tracked their movement. Their formation too controlled to be random? When the number climbed past 20, she leaned closer, eyes narrowing. 45 seconds later, she counted 52. Her pulse stayed steady, but her stomach sank. She switched channels and reported contact. 50+ armed hostiles approaching grid, 7 Alpha. Major Pierce's voice came through, clipped and cold. Dismissing her call as thermal ghosts caused by moisture, Emily adjusted focus, toggled her scope to white-hot. The figures moved in patterns bounding pairs. Coordinated spacing. Not ghosts. Not rain. Her voice stayed level as she repeated her report. But new acknowledgement came back. Below, the SEALs pushed deeper into the trees, unaware of what waited ahead. The jungle grew quiet again. Too quiet. Even the rain seemed to pause, like the world was holding its breath. The trap was already closing. The jungle erupted without warning. 1 second, the SEAL team was moving through the mist. The next, a blast ripped through the tree line, spraying dirt and splinters. The ground shook under their boots as automatic gunfire poured from both sides. Davis hit the mud, shouting contact left and right while bursts of fire flashed through the rain. The air filled with the crack of bullets and the screams of ricochets. Radios flared with overlapping voices calling for cover. Casualty reports and grid coordinates. Every command came out sharp and fast, clipped by adrenaline. Mud and smoke turned the jungle into a blur of color and motion. From her ridge above, Staff Sergeant Emily Ward saw the pattern instantly. The SEAL formation was collapsing under crossfire. She scanned through her M2010 scope, the reticle slicing through rain and chaos. Her rangefinder blinked a readout. Distance, 920 meters. The team was boxed in, pinned by machine gun fire from a ridge and an RPG team moving into position. Her radio filled with shouts. Davis's voice was calm but strained as he called for immediate support. Major Pierce's voice cut in from headquarters, commanding them to hold. He said interference had created false contact. Emily stared through her scope, jaw locked, hearing the denial echo in her headset. She saw the RPG team kneel behind a log, aligning their shot. Her thumb flicked the safety to fire. Her breath slowed. Exhale. Squeeze. Break. The first round cracked the jungle air and dropped the insurgent leader just behind the ear. The second shot detonated the RPG before it could launch, the explosion rolling through the trees. The third hit the gunner, suppressing the SEAL flank, silencing the heavy weapon. The recoil pushed gently into her shoulder, a rhythm that matched her pulse. Below, the SEALs took the opening, shifting position and dragging a wounded man into cover. Davis's voice came through again, sharp and confused, demanding to know who was firing. The next pause carried realization. He told her to keep going. Pierce's voice shouted through comms, ordering a ceasefire, threatening suspension for disobeying direct command. Emily didn't hesitate. She adjusted 2 clicks for wind drift and whispered back that if she stopped, they'd die. She rolled her cheek against the stock, reacquired, and fired again. Each round was calculated, deliberate, and final. Her hands moved on instinct, ejecting brass, reloading, adjusting scope focus. Through the lens, she watched the enemy line waver. Every time a target dropped, another tried to move in, but her shots pinned them down. The SEALs began to advance under her cover, their formation reuniting through the mud. Rain hammered harder now, washing blood and soil into the ground. Her radio was a blur of commands, heartbeats, and noise. But inside the scope, everything was quiet. The firefight stretched minutes that felt like hours. Her position was exposed, but she didn't move. The rifle became an extension of her will, the only calm point in the storm. When the last target fell, she rechecked her chamber and whispered a range call to no one. The jungle was still smoking, but for the first time, no shots came back. Down below, men she had never met were still alive because she chose not to wait for permission. The silence that followed didn't sound like victory. It sounded like the moment after crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. The command post was alive with noise, voices overlapping through static, maps scattered across the table. Captain Sarah Lou leaned over the monitor, eyes locked on the grainy drone feed, showing flashes of muzzle fire through sheets of rain. The pattern caught her attention. It wasn't random suppression. It was surgical. Each burst landed exactly where it needed to. Leadership targets disappeared first. Then the heavy gunners. Then the edges of the flanking line. She zoomed in, her expression hardening with realization. Falcon 9. Staff Sergeant Emily Ward. She remembered the file expert marksman, sniper, Kandahar veteran, commendation for precision under fire. Major Pierce stormed across the room, face red with fury, shouting about direct orders and disobedience. Lou's hand hesitated over the comms, control for one breath. Then she flipped the override. Falcon 9. This is command. You have full engagement authority. On the ridge. Emily heard the words through static and rain. Copy that, she said. Voice steady. She settled deeper into the mud. Elbows braced. Ghillie veil plastered against her neck. Her breath matched the rhythm of gunfire below. The SEALs were pinned between 2 tree lines. Movement limited. Visibility almost zero. She checked the wind on her Kestrel, compensated for drag. Adjusted elevation 2 clicks up. The crosshairs found a runner moving between cover, 1 exhale, Tlega press. Then the soft recoil. The man fell, She pivoted right, eyes scanning through her thermal scope, tracking targets. By heat bloom, she wasn't firing wildly. Each shot carved a gap, a narrow corridor for the SEALs to move through. Below, Lieutenant Davis shouted to his team to advance between volleys. Emily's rhythm became their signal. 2 shots meant shift right. 3 meant hold position. The men dragged the wounded through the mud. Slipping but alive. Emily whispered small corrections under her breath. Wind steady. Elevation confirmed. Distance 840. Fire. Each round cut through the storm. Precise and absolute. A shell detonated nearby, showering hair and dirt. She didn't flinch. Her scope stayed centered. Her voice came through comms with calm updates, almost detached, as if her body and mind existed in separate worlds. Then the sound changed. A deep roar rolled through the rain. Low and mechanical. AH-64. Apaches broke through the cloud line. Rotors beating against the storm. The radio lit up with call signs. The quick reaction force finally on station. Hellfire missiles streaked into the tree line, lighting the jungle with orange fire. The thump of 30mm cannons followed, shaking the ridge. Emily adjusted her aim, firing in sync with the helicopters, her shots marking targets for their engagement. Below, the SEALs moved fast. The corridor she built widening under the combined fire. Minutes later, it was over. Smoke drifted where the jungle once stood. The last echoes of battle faded into rain. Davis's voice came through, rough with exhaustion. He told her she'd saved his men. Emily looked through her scope one last time, scanning the clearing. Clear, she said quietly. She ejected the spent casing and laid the rifle beside her. The mud was cold against her gloves, the storm still pressing down. She had done what she had to do, but her chest felt heavy, not proud. The fight was over, but the choice would follow her long after the rain stopped. The rain never stopped. It softened from a storm to a steady fall, tapping against the sheet metal roof of the Joint Task Force compound. The jungle outside smoldered, smoke curling through the mist. The smell of wet earth mixed with gunpowder and diesel, thick enough to taste. Under the dim floodlights, trucks rolled back through the gate, their tires cutting deep into the mud. The SEALs climbed out one by one, faces streaked with grime, uniforms torn. No one spoke. They were alive. And that was enough. The kind of silence that followed wasn't empty. It was sacred. Staff Sergeant Emily Ward sat beneath an awning. Her rifle disassembled across a canvas mat. Mud ran in thin lines down her sleeves. But her hands were steady. She cleaned the bolt face, wiped the chamber dry, and brushed debris from the optics. Each movement was calm, practiced, almost meditative. She didn't look at the trucks. She didn't need to. The discipline of the task was its own grounding. The M2010 lay open like a clock. Every piece returned to order. When she slid the bolt back in, it clicked softly, clean and final. Lieutenant Mark Davis spotted her across the hangar and walked over. His forearm was wrapped in a blood-stained bandage, his uniform torn at the collar. He stopped a few feet away, unsure what to say. "You're the one they said wasn't supposed to shoot," he finally muttered, his voice more respect than question. Emily glanced up briefly, meeting his eyes. "Guess I missed that memo," she said, then turned back to her rifle. He smiled once, faint and tired, before extending his hand. The handshake was brief, their palms slick with rain, but it carried more truth than words ever could. Captain Sarah Lou entered next, hair damp and stuck to her face. Her field tablet flickered with a half-dead battery as she crouched beside Emily. "You kept the window open long enough for the Apaches to finish it," she said quietly. Emily shook her head. "The helicopters finished it." Lou smiled. "You kept them alive until they arrived." No one said more. The air between them held the kind of understanding that doesn't need ceremony. Then the hangar door opened with a heavy echo. Major Alan Pierce stepped in, folder in hand, eyes burning with frustration. He started to speak about protocol, violations, and inquiries. But the sound of boots behind him stopped him cold. Colonel Henry Davis walked in, soaked to the shoulders, his expression unreadable. He spoke without raising his voice. Major Pierce, you're relieved of command. Effective immediately. Negligence. Failure to act on field intelligence. The words cut like the final report of a rifle. Pierce froze, folder still in his hand. The colonel turned to Emily, his tone softening. You saved 12 Americans today. That's not disobedience. That's honor. For a long moment, no one moved. Then every man in the hangar stood. The sound of boots against concrete echoed through the space. Blending with the rhythm of rain above them, no one saluted. No one needed to. The gesture was quiet, unspoken, and absolute. Emily looked down at her rifle. Her reflection caught in the glass of the scope. The storm was over, but the weight of what it took to end it lingered, heavy and real. The red clay range at Fort Benning shimmered under the late summer sun. Dust rose with every step as cadets moved in a careful line, rifles braced against their shoulders. Staff Sergeant Emily Ward walked behind them, quiet and watchful, her boots leaving shallow prints in the dirt. She spoke sparingly, correcting stances, reminding them to breathe, to let the trigger surprise them instead of forcing it. Most of them were too nervous to listen fully, but she didn't mind. They would learn in time. Patience saved lives. That lesson had taken her years and a battlefield to understand. The wind shifted, and she adjusted a cadet's elbow. He looked back at her, hesitant, the question already forming in his eyes. He asked how she knew that night she was right to go against an order. Emily stopped, her gaze drifting past the range to the tree line beyond. You never know, she said finally. You just trust what you see and what your conscience tells you to do. The boy nodded, but she could tell he didn't grasp the weight of it yet. He would one day, maybe far from here. When the world asked him to choose between obedience and what was right, far away in North Carolina, Lieutenant Mark Davis pulled into his driveway for the first time in months. His little girl ran across the yard in bright yellow rain boots, her laughter cutting through the quiet. He lifted her easily, one arm around her, the other holding back tears. His wife stood in the doorway, hands pressed to her face. When she stepped forward to meet him, the moment was small and pure, the kind that feels like breath after being underwater too long. For them, the war was finally over. In a hospital garden outside San Diego, Petty Officer Ryan Torres sat with his shoulder wrapped in gauze. Sunlight warming the scar that ran beneath it, he held a notebook open on his lap, writing a letter he would never send. Thank you for seeing what we didn't. Thank you for not listening. He closed the book when he finished, a calm spreading through him that words alone couldn't explain. Captain Sarah Lou stood in her office weeks later, looking at the commendation folded in her drawer. She'd refused to mount it. The plaque didn't matter. What mattered was that she'd made the call when it counted. In the new training manuals, her name appeared beside a case study, Mindanao engagement, overwatch integrity protocol. Field intelligence can't be ignored. The lesson had become doctrine. Back on the range, the cadets packed up for the evening. The sun dipped low, turning the red dirt to gold. Emily stayed behind. Sitting on the bench with her rifle laid across her lap, she wiped the barrel, her thumb brushing the engraving on the trigger guard. R. Jensen. Never miss twice. The letters caught the last of the light. In the distance, laughter carried on the warm wind. She listened, remembering rain and jungle and the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat under fire. Peace, she realized, wasn't silence. It was knowing that when it mattered, You aimed true. The jungle was quiet now. The rain had ended hours ago. Leaving behind the slow hiss of steam rising from the mud, sunlight filtered through the gaps in the shattered canopy, turning every droplet on the leaves into fragments of glass. A single brass casing lay half-buried beside a puddle, glinting as the light touched it. This was where she had taken her position, where a single decision had drawn the line between duty and conscience. The earth had long since covered the footprints, but the echo of what happened here lingered like breath in the air. They say courage is loud, that it comes with metals and noise, but that isn't always true. Sometimes courage is quiet, steady, and unseen. It's the moment when a soldier looks past fear and rank and remembers what the job was meant to protect. The jungle was never the enemy. It was just a place where choices had to be made, where one soldier trusted her instincts more than her orders. What remained was not guilt or pride, but understanding. Images fade across time. A drill instructor's voice calling cadence under the sun. A folded flag resting on a mantle in a quiet home. A young cadet learning to breathe through the shot, to wait, to think. The narrator's voice carries through these moments, calm and grounded. Orders give the military its structure, but it is humanity that gives it meaning. Emily's defiance was never rebellion. It was trust. Trust in what she saw through her scope, in what her training told her was real, in what her conscience refused to silence. The faint sound of rain returns, mixing with the hum of a generator and the soft click of a bolt sliding home. The story moves back to Fort Benning. Emily stands at the edge of the range, watching the last of her cadets pack their rifles and head toward the barracks. The sun hangs low, warm on the red clay and the steel of the weapon in her hands. She looks out across the quiet field, listening to the echo of that jungle storm one last time. And as the light fades, the final truth settles with her. Some orders protect authority. Others protect life. The difference is what defines the kind of soldier you choose to be.